Okay, fantastic. Let's make a start. Thank you so much for joining me for this webinar this morning. We're going to be talking about how to find the perfect content management system that works for you. So just before we begin, a couple of housekeeping points, if I may. So we're going to be recording this webinar, so we'll send you a link to the recording and slide deck after the webinar today. If I could ask you to stay muted for the webinar just as I talk through the slide deck. At the end then we'll have an opportunity for some questions, so you can at that point obviously feel free to unmute yourself, or I'd encourage you to put your questions into the chat feature of Zoom throughout this webinar, and I'll have a look at that towards the end. Also, just to note, I'll be kind of covering this topic broadly today, because I fully appreciate that every organisation has their own way of doing things and every organisation's requirements are different. But I hope, in essence, that the webinar gives everyone a good idea as to the principles you should employ when choosing a CMS. And I won't necessarily deep dive into comparing CMSs side by side today, but just talk through kind of what you should look at when choosing a CMS. But actually after the webinar, I'm going to share with you our CMS guide, which has just been rewritten. And within that guide, we will compare a number of CMSs side by side. And finally, please get involved today. So please send us your thoughts and your pictures on social media and use the hashtag #WebboxWebinar. So just a little bit about me before we get into it. My name is Will. I'm the founder and managing director of a digital agency called Webbox. We're based here in Cardiff. And I founded Webbox back in 2008, and I've been using CMSs of all different shapes and sizes now for over 12 years. And it's given me a real good insight into the pros and cons of each one, but also the decision-making process behind actually choosing a CMS for a web project. So hopefully I've got a little bit of kind of knowledge and experience to share with you today that hopefully will benefit you. So before we delve into the depths of what you should look for in a CMS, let's touch on the what, why, and who. So this is the plan for the next 45 minutes. I'm going to talk about what, why, and who. I'm going to look into how you should choose a CMS. I'm going to bring us to a close by looking at some of the common mistakes, and then I'm going to release our CMS guide to you and have some questions. So I hope that's all okay for you guys. So let's delve straight into it. So let's have a look at the what first. So what is a CMS? So a content management system is basically a web application that is used to allow non-technical users to update and maintain a website. So ultimately it's an interface which allows you to get the most out of updating your website. And most CMSs would normally allow you to do things like content creation and curation. It would allow you to manage and store your content and multimedia, so images and videos, for example. It would look after things like your workflow. So that means there might be an approval process involved, whereby maybe an editor would approve a piece of content that's been submitted by another user. And finally, it would allow you normally to schedule content as well. So for example, you might have a blog piece or an article which should go out Tuesday at 10 o'clock, and it will look after tasks like that for you. So what is the point of actually using a CMS? Because you might be aware that you could have a website or web platform which doesn't have a CMS. So what are the benefits of using a CMS? Ultimately, it gives you total control. The CMS tool should give you control over the design and content published to your site. It allows you to make changes kind of with ease, and also without having to depend on the services of an agency or a developer. So it should allow you to do these things without any coding knowledge. It's also useful because multiple users can get involved. So business websites are usually managed by different teams, from those updating the products and service details to those who publish blogs, for example. So CMSs allow multiple users to work on the site irrespective of their location. Security is another good reason for using a CMS. So most CMSs have state-of-the-art security features that protect your content and database from all kinds of malicious attacks. And you can also easily restrict parts of your CMS via permission-based systems as well. So there's a real benefit from a security perspective. Fourthly, updates and upgrades. So most CMS ecosystems are really flexible, and hence you can easily update and upgrade your website to be in sync with the latest version of that CMS. That will often give you not only security benefits, but hopefully feature enhancements as well. And finally, it does allow for modular development. So most content management systems allow for this, where every feature and element in the site acts as a module, and that can then be added or removed easily. So this makes your website highly scalable, and again puts you in the driving seat for managing your website. So the final part of this is the who. So who should choose the CMS? And you know what? This is a lot harder than it might appear. So as the size and needs of your organization grows, so does the number of stakeholders involved. So for example, your IT team might demand the CMS fits in with their current infrastructure stack, whereas the marketing team might want something that plugs in with their marketing tools. But the sales team, on the other hand, they might want the website to integrate into a CRM which they use. So as you can start to see, keeping all stakeholders happy can be a bit of a minefield. So my advice to large organizations would be to identify the key stakeholders and their main requirements early on in this process. So start off by identifying the stakeholders. So I've talked about a few there. So IT, for example, because they're going to be ultimately responsible for the kind of maintenance of this technology. Marketing would be another department, because ultimately the website is going to be a marketing tool for most businesses. So for content marketing focused organizations, it is crucial that marketing has a say on this, because ultimately they're going to probably be using it day in, day out, and potentially not only updating content, but creating landing pages as well. And then also sales. So the sales team are going to want the website to integrate probably with a CRM, so that inquiries or leads or sale information is fed directly through to the CRM from the website. So once you've identified the stakeholders, it's then worth meeting with all of those stakeholders and gathering their requirements. And the best way to do that, in my opinion, would be to use the Moreso methodology, where we look at the must-haves, should-haves, could-haves, and would-haves. Okay, so let's go through those. The must-haves, these are essential features that the department simply cannot work without. Okay, so they must be part of the CMS and the project. Should-haves, so these are features which are generally as important as a must-have, but could potentially be delivered in a future phase rather than for phase one of the project. Could-haves, so these are more desirable requests. You know, that's when people say it would be nice to have, and you go, okay, well that's maybe a could-have. We'll put that in the could-have pile. And then finally, would-have. So these are very much features which are not critical. They might give you the lowest kind of payback or return, and maybe not even appropriate for this time. So once you've defined your stakeholders and all of the requirements from each stakeholder group, you could then put that into a bit of a chart, and that might look something like this. So you could put a matrix together to actually take on board all of the input that you've gathered from a stakeholder workshop, and the one that we've got in front of us obviously just gives you an idea as to how to do this using the Moreso methodology, but also how it would look if you had 4 departments in the mix. But for your organization, look, it might be that you've got one or 10 departments that you need to consider, but you can see how this can be easily adapted for your organization. In essence, you're looking for a CMS that meets as many high priority features for as many stakeholders as possible. So when looking at this table, it's as many as the points on the left-hand side as possible. So as many as the must-haves in importance, that's what you're trying to tick off when considering which CMS system to use. Now, of course, in smaller organizations, the decision might just fall to one department or even one small project team. That's no problem, but either way, I would still encourage you to use this model because actually it's a really good way to identify key requirements and to choose a relevant CMS. So let's have a little deep dive into 10 principles that you should employ when choosing a CMS. Okay, so number one, what are the business impacts? So when considering the impacts on your business, you need to think about the responsibilities that you take on when selecting a platform. So for some platforms, you will either rely on internal staff and or maybe an agency to help you maintain and develop the CMS. With some other platforms, most of the development work might be done for you already. And actually all you need to do at that point is then configure the CMS to suit your needs. Internal adoption of these systems might well be faster, but they also limit the ongoing development of the business. So it's worth looking at both types of systems to see which one is going to best suit your needs. But either way, we need to consider all of these when choosing a CMS, as it will become a responsibility of the business and it will impact people's workflow and processes. Number two, we need to understand the true cost of implementing and maintaining a CMS. So if I can use the iceberg analogy, the cost maybe of a CMS implementation and or maybe its relevant license fees potentially might just be the tip of the iceberg. And you might actually find that there are significant other costs to actually maintaining the CMS. So for example, the CMS might well be very timely to update and upgrade, and this might incur some significant development costs. On the other hand, it might well be that the CMS is quite heavy on server resources, and therefore the server infrastructure and hosting infrastructure that you require is far greater than it would be for maybe another CMS, and therefore your ongoing costs are going to be higher. So it is really good to look at this. It's also worth considering though internal costs. So for example, it might well be that a particular CMS is quite cumbersome to use and it takes a lot longer to create and edit content, and therefore your team are going to take a lot longer to update the website, and obviously time is money for your team. Whereas on the flip side, it might be that your agency has increased costs, or maybe your web developer, because actually there's a lack of availability of off-the-shelf plugins, and therefore they might need to develop everything from scratch. So these are kind of scenarios that you might want to think about in order to understand the true cost of implementing a CMS. I recently read a useful piece from Computer Weekly, and the author describes the true cost of technology, and I just thought I'd put this in because I found it really interesting. So he says this is not just about keeping things ticking over. You have to invest in regular improvements to help the system in good shape. To keep the system in good shape. This should save you money in the long run and provide a better service for your customers. And it got me thinking, because ultimately what we should be doing here is considering the CMS and website as actually a piece of software which you need to constantly maintain and develop in order to allow the business to move forward, rather than just considering it as a one-off implementation and once the project is completed, not having to worry about it again. So it just got me thinking on those lines, and hopefully you're thinking the same. Okay, my third suggestion here is to to look at technology in a holistic way. So your CMS will likely not exist on its own, in silo. At a time when technology affects every aspect of your business, it is critical that your CMS works well with other marketing, sales, comms, and project management software that you might use. So I'd suggest that you start by doing a technology audit of actually what tools and technologies the business uses. So for example, you might use a particular CRM, a particular account system, a bespoke portal, an email and social media platform, and maybe a customer support platform. All of these should be listed, and then you should consider whether they need to be integrated with the CMS, and if so, does the CMS allow for an integration with those platforms? So ultimately, you need to look at the dependencies, not just looking at the CMS in silo. As an aside, just whilst we're touching on this point, I think it's worth considering at this point any data which might need to be migrated from your existing CMS, because you'll need to look at a migration plan as well as to how you can take that data from your existing CMS, if you have one, over to the new CMS as well. Okay, so number 4, skill set. So this is something which is often overlooked as part of the CMS selection process, but it has a deep impact on the success of any CMS deployment. Simply put, you want to choose a CMS that your team can actually use. So broadly speaking, you can divide this into 2 categories: technical and end user skill availability. So from a technical point of view, does your agency or web developer or in-house team have the technical skills to use and maintain this CMS? And also from an end user perspective, does your editorial team or marketing team have the skill set to use the CMS? Is the CMS's user interface intuitive, or is it cumbersome? Because these are things which you should look at when considering whether the CMS is right for the skill set of your team and partners. Okay, on to number 5. We're halfway there. So my next point is security. So security is obviously a big consideration, especially nowadays. So you want to look at a CMS that will keep your content and customer data secure against current and future threats. So there are 3 things to consider here, in my opinion. The first is the security features. So does the CMS have built-in security features such as 2-step authentication? And if not, does it have plugins or the ability for those things to be developed into the CMS? The second is actually the pace of development. Things move quickly nowadays. So does the developer of the CMS release regular updates and security fixes when they're available? And if so, how would they be installed? And do you have a process for doing that internally? And thirdly, just want to touch on the plugin or module environment which that CMS might also have. So are you commonly using plugins and modules which are secure? And do the developers of those plugins and modules keep them secure and release updates? These are really important because actually in many instances a website might be compromised through an out-of-date plugin or module rather than through the CMS's security flaws itself. So it is worth looking at those third-party dependencies. Okay, number 6, so the customization of the CMS. So the best CMS platforms are not always the ones that give clients everything they need right out of the box, but actually the ones that allow clients to customize the platform to meet their needs. We always talk about here at Webbox the fact that there isn't a one solution fits all approach. So actually we don't expect the CMS out of the box to work for everyone, but the important thing is that it can be developed to meet and exceed, hopefully, all of your requirements. But the interesting thing is some platforms restrict access to code, or they force you to use the platform exactly as it is. And usually those same platforms provide front-end templates that may well be aesthetically pleasing, but are difficult to customize or rebuild or to allow you to create landing pages. So you want to be in a position where you're able to tweak the interface and experience of the back end to allow your in-house team a better experience of using the system, as well as providing a better experience for your end users using the actual website or portal, whatever is on the front end. This will put you in control, put you in the driving seat overall aspects then of the front end. So whilst considering this, you might just want to ask yourself a few questions, such as, can I customize the look and feel of my website freely, or are there restrictions? Can the back end be tailored to simplify the interface, maybe hide functionality which you don't need, or even to match my brand guidelines? Will it be prohibitively expensive to actually add features that I need? And does the CMS vendor offer a strong level of documentation? So these are some of the questions that I think are worth asking when looking at how the CMS can actually be customized, because ultimately this is going to be absolutely paramount to the system growing alongside your business. Okay, so everyone I'm sure has heard of search engine optimization, and ultimately I just thought I'd use this image because it's almost like that game of playing hide and seek. We all want our websites to be found by Google, so this is of utmost importance to all of us, I'm sure. So simply put, if you implement a new CMS that nobody can find in a search engine, then ultimately that's just a really bad choice and a really bad investment. And actually your boards or decision makers, budget holders are not going to be pleased with the end result. But the best CMS platforms will have features that help you configure everything from the basics like meta tags, title tags, headings, sitemaps, search engine friendly URLs, etc., to boost the content's visibility on major search engines. So start by asking yourself, does the CMS have those features, or can I get them through maybe a plugin, or can I get the agency or developer to implement that? Because that's going to be really paramount to ensuring the website can be found across all major search engines. Okay, point number 8. So you might have heard of something called a WYSIWYG editor. If you haven't, that simply stands for what you see is what you get. And this allows you to edit your content of a website or other front end without having to look at code or anything technical. So it's an interface very much like editing a document in Microsoft Word, where it's as simple as selecting text, clicking the B button, and it emboldens the text. So that is what a WYSIWYG editor does within a CMS. And this allows marketers and also non-technical users to maintain the website, to manage its content effectively without needing to upskill them to a developer level and actually know the insides of the code and how the system does that. But also some editors go one step further, and they allow you to employ things like drag and drop. So it allows content creators to adapt the layout of a page potentially. And this is really important because what we're finding at the moment is marketing teams especially are looking for more and more control to create new pages, and specifically landing pages for paid ad campaigns, whereby they can spin up a new page, maybe adapt its layout slightly, and do all of that themselves in-house without a need for a developer. So this is quite an important part of the mix if that's what your marketing team are trying to achieve on a regular basis. Okay, number 9 is all about the support. So the support from the actual CMS vendor or agency. So it's one of those services which, in my experience, is either neglected or completely absent in most people's thought processes when choosing a CMS. But it's absolutely paramount to establish how the CMS will be supported right from the outset. So this could include everything from really good documentation and training from the vendor or agency, all the way through to ongoing support and maintenance. These are things which you need to consider because, like I said earlier, you should consider this as a piece of software which is going to develop and grow with your business rather than a one-off implementation. Furthermore, should you move agency or have to have a change of team internally, will the platform be easily transferable to another agency, or is it easy for them to pick up by maybe a new starter within the business? So these are things to consider from an internal support perspective as well. Okay, point number 10. So I'm a big believer in looking further down the road and looking into the future, because if we just consider what you require for phase 1, often that leads to a problem further down the road. So the chosen CMS platform needs to be looked at as an investment and an asset to your business, and therefore it is important to look at this a little bit more holistically and look at the big picture. So you might wish to ask CMS vendors, how the product is kept up to date and how new features find their way into your website. Understand how upgrades and updates work and the costs involved with the upkeep and maintenance of the CMS platform. Or if you're working with an agency, for example, ask them about their experience of developing that CMS over a period of time, and how they propose also to keep the website and CMS up to date. And actually, this leads me on to the first of my 3 common mistakes, which I've seen time and time again. So the first is not considering your future requirements. So I fully appreciate that you might not know exactly what you need in several years' time. That's totally understandable. But it is important to look a little bit further ahead and to consider this now so that you have a roadmap of potential requirements when considering a CMS. So for example, if you know that the business is moving towards having an e-commerce element of the website, and they're hoping to look at that within the next 12 to 18 months, it is important to consider that now in phase 1, because some CMSs lean towards e-commerce integrations and features, and others shy away from it a lot, and therefore will impact the CMS which you end up choosing. What we don't want to be in a position of is in 12-18 months time, when the business say, yeah, we're ready to go e-commerce now, that actually the website and CMS then just need to be totally redeveloped because the CMS isn't sufficient for the requirements of the business at that point. Okay, number 2 is another mistake is choosing a CMS without any collaboration with your agency or web developer. So, I've seen this go both ways, and the end result is often a CMS which doesn't allow the business to grow, or a CMS that's actually just difficult to use. So the agency or web developer will need some input into this from a technology and hands-on perspective. So for example, they might have had an agency might have had a bad experience with a particular CMS, and they might be able to justify that and to give you good reasons why a particular CMS isn't fit for your particular requirements. I would flag at this point though that hopefully the agency is being impartial at that point and not just saying that because they would prefer to use a different CMS. So I'm kind of going to put that caveat in there. But it is really important that you do collaborate with any partners that you work with, because ultimately they're doing this day in, day out, and will have some value that they can bring to the table. And my third mistake that I've seen time and time again is choosing a CMS based on recommendation or hearing a particular brand name rather than taking a considered approach. So actually this is one of the reasons why I've put the webinar together to help people actually consider the CMS rather than just having to undertake their own research or to ask friends what CMS they use within their business. So to give you a practical example, I remember working with a client that was absolutely adamant that they wanted to use a particular CMS, and upon asking them how they'd come to that decision, it was simply because they'd been recommended it by a friend that owned another e-commerce business. But we all know that what works for one business doesn't necessarily work for another. And though as an agency we were very happy to use that CMS, I just didn't feel it was the right choice for that particular client, because I kind of intimately knew how their business and workflow worked, and I just didn't feel it was right. Needless to say, within 12 months, the business and various departments were pulling their hair out because it was very cumbersome to use. And within 2 years, a new CMS had been chosen and implemented for a new website. So I think it is important to make the decision which is right for you. Hence, that's in the title of this webinar. It needs to be a decision which is absolutely right for you and your business. But it needs to be done in a considered approach, rather than potentially taking a recommendation from another business which I'm sure works in a completely different way to yours. So I just wanted to share those 3 common mistakes with you. Look, there's many more, but hopefully some of that is relatable and helpful to you. So as we move towards the end of the webinar, I just wanted to remind you that following this session, I'm going to share with all of you a CMS guide. So this is a guide that we've put together and recently rewritten, which talks you through everything from what is a CMS, the benefits of using it, how you should compare and assess which CMS to use. And then it goes into some of the nitty gritty as to comparing side by side some of the UK's best CMS's top names, which I'm sure you'll be interested to see. So I'll send that document out to you shortly. I hope that's of value to you. Please feel free to share it internally as well with other departments to help them define their requirements and to see what's on the market. And also I just wanted to offer my assistance, and I say that in a totally impartial way. So if I can help you with choosing a CMS which is right for your business, then I'm more than happy for you to contact me. So please just use the email address on the screen now with the subject line of I'm choosing a CMS, can you help? And that will just flag it up in my inbox, and I'll be more than happy to come back to you and help you work through this decision process. And if I may, allow me to play devil's advocate and to challenge why you're choosing a particular CMS, just for the purpose of making sure that that is the right CMS for you. So thank you ever so much for listening. I really appreciate your time this morning. I want to kind of just open this up for some questions. So I'm going to check the chat now because I've seen some notifications come up. But if you haven't already, please feel free to submit a question in the chat and I'll be more than happy to answer it. So let me just grab the chat window. Okay, so I've got one sent to me direct here. Okay, let me read it out. What would you suggest we do when several people within the business want to go ahead with different CMSs? Yeah, good question. Do you know what? It's a little bit like sometimes every department is trying to pull in their own direction, and it can be very frustrating. But I think I'd draw us back to this Moscow methodology of coming back to each department's requirements and to really drill down into what is an absolute must-have, what's paramount, and coming back to then, does that CMS allow for that? And then also I'd kind of bring into focus the forward-thinking approach to say, if this CMS is the one for us now, will it also be the one for us potentially in a year or two's time as the business grows and develops? So yeah, I sympathise with the question because sometimes different departments can pull things in different directions. But if we can bring it back to being pragmatic and actually looking at the business's requirements, and hopefully that will allow you to discount particular CMSs and hopefully one or two come through as the chosen solution. Okay, so I've got another question here. So sent to me direct, it says our current agency is suggesting the use of a proprietary CMS. Okay, we're initially hesitant to go with this. What's your view? That's a good question. So I think across the industry and across kind of organizations, there can sometimes be a hesitancy over using a proprietary CMS. And sometimes, and rightly so, that could be because an agency or provider or vendor or developer have a proprietary CMS and are actually under the hood. One of the reasons of having that is to almost lock you in to make sure that you can only use that person to keep the website developed and maintained. I think if that is the case, I would very much shy away from it. On the complete flip side of that, I would ask that provider what is under the hood of that proprietary CMS. So from a technology point of view, what technologies does it use? And if those technologies are uniform and used globally, then I would have less concern, because ultimately under the hood, the code can be developed. But the key question, I guess, at that point is, does that provider allow other agencies and developers to develop their code? And again, if that's a no, then that would be a big red flag for me. So I'm kind of on the fence here. I have seen some very good proprietary CMSs in my time, but I think there's some key questions that you need to ask just to make sure that you don't get yourself into a trap where you have to use that agency or developer for the life of the CMS. Okay, I've got another question here on chat. So where would you suggest looking for vendors? Where would you start? I have used a bunch of previous companies, but know that none of them are fit for my situation now. Well, first of all, it's really good that you've realised that none of them are fit for the current purpose. I say that because sometimes people just think, I've always used a particular CMS, I'm sure it'll be great for this implementation too. And it's really good to step back and to challenge that, to make sure that we get the right CMS implementation from day one. In terms of where to start, personally, I would take advice from people who are using CMSs day in, day out. So whether that's kind of like a IT or marketing team internally, or whether that's a partner agency or web developer you use, I would start there. And the reason I say start there is because those people are going to have hands-on experience of working with hopefully multiple CMSs. My slight kind of cautious side would say that if you start by just looking at the market and just ultimately Googling, best CMS to use, I think you're going to get flooded with responses. And not that that's not a good way to do it, but it might just be a little bit overwhelming, because you're going to get hundreds of different CMS vendors putting their badge in front of you. And to be honest, when you read their websites, they all sound wonderful, they all sound great, because they're not necessarily going to touch on the limiting factors or the things which are difficult to use. So for me, I would always start with people who have actually have hands-on experience of using CMSs. In that instance, and I say this, it's just a genuine offer. If you want to ping me an email, I'm more than happy to kind of help you consider a CMS for you and what's right for your organisation. Just because I've used quite a few over the last 12 years or so. But if not me, maybe another agency partner or a developer that you already use would be another perfect point of contact to start there. Okay, I've got, let's have a look, one more. Okay, so let me read this. So we're trying to find a CMS that will initially power our website, but in the future it could power multiple websites or even content for our app or intranet. How would you approach this situation? Okay, interesting one. Okay, so ultimately a CMS would normally, out of the box, deliver content to one front end. And by front end, I mean, that could be a website, it could be an app or intranet or some sort of portal. But there are many CMSs out there which allow for something called multi-site. And a multi-site CMS would end up powering multiple front ends. So you could have an instance of a particular CMS which is set up in a multi-site fashion, and that delivers content to multiple places, and it allows you to put different content on each platform. So I would definitely suggest that you start by looking at multi-site CMSs. The other option, just to touch on something you might not have heard of, is to consider a headless CMS. So a headless CMS is one which is totally decoupled from the front end. All, its sole purpose, is simply just to hold and store content and allow you to edit it and manage it. And then through an API, you would deliver the content out to as many front ends as you want, whether it's website, portal, app, or otherwise. So actually it could be worth, in that instance, having a look at a headless CMS, because you might find that that's a better solution for you in that instance. So let me check chat. Okay, so I've gone through all of those questions, and from a time perspective, we're just on time. So I'm glad we wrapped it up within 45 minutes, which is great. So just want to say thank you ever so much for kind of listening to the webinar this morning. I genuinely appreciate your time. If I can help, please feel free to reach out, and my contact details are on your screen now. But also I'll be in touch shortly. I will give you a copy of this recording, the slide deck, and also our CMS guide to hopefully get you thinking about what things you should consider when choosing a CMS. So yeah, thank you so much for listening. Enjoy the rest of your day, and look forward to hearing from you soon.